Hello and welcome to Who's the Bossk? It's a Star Wars and Lucasfilm podcast from laughingplace.com. My name is Mike Celestino. I am your host. I am the lead Southern California reporter and editorial director for Star Wars content at Laughing Place. This is episode number 161 of Who's the Bossk, and we will be discussing the fifth and theoretically final Indiana Jones film, which came out this past weekend. It's called Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And for that conversation, I have invited back on the show my friend and fellow Indiana Jones fanatic, James W. Burns. James, thank
Hi.
you for coming back on the show. How are you? What's been going on? What can you tell me about your life over the you've been on it's been a little bit since you've been on the show, a couple years, but what's been going on for you in that time?
I've been patiently waiting for this Indiana Jones film that whole time.
Okay. And how did you go about killing that time?
I just trolling for behind the scenes pictures and
Okay. So
stuff
like
like that.
pestering James Mangold on Twitter for
I do pester him a lot on Twitter.
for info. Okay, so
Yeah.
this is it's actually your third ever appearance on Who's the Bossk, and that means you've graduated to level 3 of the 5 Star Wars questions. And this is, if you don't know, if you haven't listened or watched this before, this is where we get to know our guests' Star Wars fandom a little bit. Level 3 is getting into the weeds, getting into the more in-depth questions about Star Wars. James, you ready for this?
Maybe. We'll see.
Maybe you're ready. Okay. Number 1 of the 5 Star Wars questions, level 3. What is your favorite Star Wars book or comic book, and why?
My favorite Star Wars comic book is, I believe it's Star Wars Tales, right? Am I
Yeah.
am I right about this?
Is this the indie thing that
The
we're getting?
I think it's number 6.
Okay.
It's totally I'm just making it up, but I think it's number 6. Um, yeah, and it is where Indy and Short Round go on their this adventure, and I don't want to spoil it for. I guess can I spoil it or?
Yeah, it's been out for what, 15 years or so?
Well, they end up, the tomb or temple or thing that they're in is the Millennium Falcon, and
Yeah.
they find Chewie as this kind of Sasquatch character,
Right.
and
Yeah, I remember that. I remember thinking like I never thought that would happen in a million years that
it
they
was a
would.
good crossover.
Yeah,
That's a good crossover.
this officially licensed crossover between
Yes.
Indiana Jones and Star Wars. Not canon, really, in
No.
any sense of the word, but a lot of fun, for sure. I remember that happening. So great
Yeah.
choice that we haven't really talked about much
Yeah.
before. So number 2 of the 5 Star Wars questions, level 3. If you could own a life-size working replica of any Star Wars vehicle, what would you choose?
Ooh. Life size replica. I think I would go for a Red 5 for sure.
The X-Wing.
Yeah. Red
Okay.
5 is near and dear to my heart. It was the first Star Wars vehicle I owned as a kid. In the '90s when the re-releases came out, they did those buff
Yeah,
toys,
yeah.
and they had the X-wing. And man, I flew that X-wing through the whole house. X-wings and like the idea of fighter pilots and stuff like that just intrigues me. So I'd probably go with the Red 5.
That's awesome. That's a great choice. And I actually just cleaned my office over the weekend, but had we recorded this last week, I would have reached down on the floor and picked up that 1995 X-Wing because I had it sitting next to me, but
Yeah.
I've tidied up since then. We do want to say hi in the comments to Stephen Singleton from Cheyenne, Wyoming. Good to see you, Stephen. And by the way, yes, we are recording this live via the Laughing Place YouTube channel. Please, if you are watching live, be sure to chime in, give any comments or questions you may have. We'll be happy to address them. Number 3 for you, James, of the 5 Star Wars questions, level 3. What is your favorite non-human sentient Star Wars alien species? So we're not talking about like the creatures like the banthas or the tauntauns, stuff like that. These are aliens like the Mon Calamari, like Admiral Akbar. There's plenty of other examples of species in the Star Wars universe. What do you think, James? What's your favorite one of those?
You would think this would be a hard question.
Okay.
For some reason, I have an answer to this, and it's Utapauans for sure.
Okay.
So, and for no other reason that I just like their velvety skin.
You like big foreheads.
Yeah, and their weird lines in their skin.
And I think they've got like sharp teeth, don't they?
Yeah, a
Yeah.
friend of mine used to call the Utapauan that talks to Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith. He used to call him Corduroy Head.
His face looks like a pair of jeans.
Yes.
I have to ask you now, in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, we saw the Grand Inquisitor character brought to live action, and people observed or complained that he didn't quite look Utapawan or Pauan, or however you want to say it, enough. How did you feel about that transition from the animation to the live action for that character?
You know, I never really give a second thought about it until it was brought up. I've seen it on Twitter.
Yeah.
It can be explained off easily. You know what I mean? All humans don't look alike, so why would
Right.
all Utapauans look alike?
That works for me. I like
Mhm.
it. I buy it. So number 4, what is your what is your favorite piece of Star Wars music and why?
Oh, it has to be um, Yoda's theme on Dagobah. Empire Strikes Back, when Yoda gives the speech about fear,
Yeah.
and then how beautifully John Williams, he didn't have to go that hard, yet he does. And that piece of music is near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, beautiful theme for Yoda during one of my favorite scenes, of course, is lifting the X-wing up out of the swamp there. Just gorgeous and moving, as John Williams has proven himself capable of many
Mhm.
times. So,
Mhm.
number 4, the fifth and final of the 5 Star Wars questions, level 3. I like this one. This is a good one. If you could go back in time and be present for the filming of any Star Wars live action scene, which would it be?
Ooh, I gotta say, I would want to see the scene where Han is lowered into the carbonite
Okay.
chamber. That riffing that Harrison Ford does, the "I love you, I know."
Yeah.
I imagine there was a lot of intense conversation about him going off script, because going off script's a big deal, and
Yep.
you know famously he said you can write this stuff, but you can't speak it. So seeing that conversation between them, and the filmmaking collaboration that would have went into between director and actor, both of them talking about this scene, which becomes one of the most memorable scenes in all of Star Wars,
Yeah.
would have, for me as someone who makes films, would have been epic.
What a great choice. Such a perfect scene. And I always thought the lighting in that scene was so cool. The way they lit the carbon freezing chamber,
Mhm.
the colors, the blue and orange mixed together.
Yeah.
And yeah, we've been talking about this thing with Harrison recently because he's been doing a lot of press for the new movie. And I was talking about it with somebody, how he's very clever person, just a very smart
Mhm.
and clever person.
Mhm.
And every time he's contributed to a movie in that way, made a suggestion like that, it's always ended up being one of the
Iconic,
most
yeah.
iconic parts, memorable parts of the film. So, great choice there. That would be a wonderful thing to be present for sure. Okay,
Yeah.
that's the end. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, Irvin Kershner, being there as well as
Yeah,
in George Lucas and Harrison Ford is probably why I made that choice. Just wanted
right.
to
You
make
got the
sure.
great combo of all those folks to be around for sure.
Right.
All right, that's the end of the 5 Star Wars questions. That brings us to Star Wars headlines for this week. The big thing that I did in the last couple weeks was I read a new upcoming Star Wars novel. It's called Star Wars Inquisitor: Rise of the Red Blade. Speaking of the Inquisitors that we mentioned already, by Delilah S. Dawson, and she has written Star Wars Phasma previously, and Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, Black Spire, the novel that tied in with the land at Disney parks. I really like this new book about the Inquisitor. It's really about how a Jedi Knight went from being a Jedi Knight to falling to the dark side and becoming an Inquisitor, which is a question that I've had since we first learned about the
Mm,
Inquisitor. So I really enjoyed this. I would recommend it. It's got a lot of great new characters. It's got some classic characters. You can imagine it starts during the prequel era, so you get appearances by some of the big Jedi characters from that
right.
period. And Delilah S. Dawson is just a great writer too. So this is a good one. It's coming out in a couple weeks. I really recommend checking it out. You can read my full review on laughingplace.com. Is this something that would appeal to you, James?
It is. I unfortunately am not at the reading level that you are,
Okay.
so I don't finish. Like I'm still going through Black Spire Outpost, and
Okay.
she's already on to the next one. But you know, I think the idea of the Inquisitors, like you said, falling away
Yeah.
is something that definitely appeals to me. So I hope we see more of that in the future.
Yeah, you're always hearing about how the Inquisitors were former Jedi, but the question was always in my head, well, how did that happen? Like, how did they persuade them to go across to the other side? So this really spells out how that process played out. And I don't want to spoil too much about it, but definitely a recommend from me. Also from the publishing world, we had some new comic books come out this week. I just came back from the comic shop actually about an hour ago and picked these up. Star Wars number 36 by Charles Soule and Yoda number 9. I think that was written by maybe Mark Guggenheim. Have not read them yet, had not had a moment to read them yet, but looking forward to checking them out. And you can read my reviews probably either later today or tomorrow on Laughing Place. James, are you keeping up with the comics at all?
I am not, but are they really filling in like canon? You know, I imagine they've been going, since the Force Awakens, so it's
Yeah.
probably getting pretty dense.
So these current comics, well, the Star Wars, the main flagship title, which is just called Star Wars, when it started around the actually started early 2015. So yeah, it would have been before The Force Awakens. That filled in the gap between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, and that went for a few years. Then they caught up to Empire Strikes Back and they jumped into the period that they're in right now, which is between Empire and Jedi. So they're still kind of, I think they're inching ever so close to catching up to Return of the Jedi. There's been some interesting stuff happening with like Luke finding the green kyber crystal for his next
Mm,
lightsaber and stuff. So they've been getting ever so close to the events of Return of the Jedi. And then the Yoda comic book is about Yoda. He's on Dagobah in his exile and he's remembering events from his past. So you get a little
ooh, I
bit
like that.
of, yeah, it's kind of an anthology story where he's remembering different periods of his life going through like the prequel era. And I think it started actually in the High Republic era and went up to the prequels. So yeah, very interesting there as well. Um, check those both out if you can. And again, there'll be reviews coming very soon from me. I got to unbox and review a toy called Mixin Moods Grogu from The Mandalorian, of course. This is by Hasbro. Hasbro put this out and they sent it to me for review. And it's a fun toy where you can manipulate. It's like you manually manipulate Grogu's expressions. So his ears can move, his eyes can open and close, his mouth opens and closes, and his head can rotate, his arms can move, and stuff like that. So it's it says it's capable of 20 plus expressions, so, it's just a fun toy for younger kids, I guess.
Yeah.
Now I forget, James, are you a big collector of toys and stuff, and are your kids collectors?
My son is not a big Star Wars fan, but his it's funny because he's 7, so he's huge on Marvel
Okay.
and Guardians of the Galaxy in specific.
Yeah.
So he collects a lot of Guardians of the Galaxy stuff, but he does like Grogu and the Mandalorian. My 2-year-old is sold out on Baby Yoda. He loves Baby Yoda, and it's funny because he kind of is the baby Yoda of our house. He's mischievous, likes
Nice.
to eat.
Well, this might
So
be a good gift for him then, because
yeah,
it's intended for. I think it might be ages 3 and up, if I
okay,
remember right. So maybe next year he can get this Mix and Moods Grogu, a fun
cool.
toy from Hasbro. Getting
Yeah.
into some Indiana Jones news, we got there was a Hasbro what they call fan stream the other
Mhm,
morning.
mhm.
You were probably paying attention to this too,
Yep.
and I was live tweeting it from the Laughing Place Twitter. But they announced the next wave of these adventure series, 6-inch scale Indiana Jones figures. The two movies represented in this wave are Last Crusade and the new movie Dial of Destiny. So we've got Indiana Jones from the Last Crusade with the tie and everything. You've got the female lead of Last Crusade, which is
Mm.
Elsa, Dr. Elsa Schneider. There's the Grail Knight. This is the coolest looking one, in my
Yeah.
opinion, of all these. The Grail Knight from the end of
Mhm.
Last Crusade. Then you've got Henry Sr., of course, Henry Jones Sr., played by Sean Connery.
I
You got
can't
to
wait.
have that figure in your
Yeah.
collection. And Dr. Voller is the Mads Mikkelsen character from the new film, and Ronaldo is the Antonio Banderas character in the new film. All these action figures are coming out, and if you buy all 6 of those, you can build the Grail table from the
Cups.
end of the Last Crusade. When they announced that, I was just ecstatic because
I am so happy.
it looks so cool. I
It
really
does.
love this idea of the build and artifact that they're doing. You know, you could build the Ark of the Covenant from the first wave. They had that skull cabinet thing from Temple
Yep.
of Doom, and
Yep.
now this Grail table. So I'm guessing you'll be getting all these, James, right?
I will, and I've been slowly collecting them because
Okay.
these figures are $25 each.
Yeah.
So they're the last wave of figures that I really had to collect was from that Hasbro line that come out during 2008 Kingdom
Yes.
of the Crystal Skull, and they're cheap compared to these things.
Right.
So yeah, I've been slowly over time finding them. I have a bunch pre-ordered going forward. I didn't pre-order the original wave, but
Okay.
I got them all except Map Room Indie. I have to go on and eBay him.
Okay.
But other than that, I have pretty much everything pre-ordered that's upcoming, including this Last Crusade, because if you know me, my favorite indie movie is Last Crusade.
Yeah.
It's near and dear to my heart. So that was the first indie movie I watched in my grandmother's uh, travel trailer when I was 4 years old.
Yeah.
And Sean Connery, my grandfather's Scottish, my grandmother's Scottish, and Sean Connery reminded me of my grandpa. So he loved Sean Connery too. So that's why they had that tape in their trailer, and that was my introduction to indie. And ever since, I've always said that it has the best story arc uh, of all the indies. So I'm pumped for that Sean Connery figure.
Me too. I can't wait to get my hands on those. I did pre-order the first wave, the like build an arc wave. So I knew I wanted to make sure I had all of them to build the arc. But then after
Mhm.
that, I've just been kind of hunting for them, like you said,
Yeah.
one at a time. The most recent one that my wife actually found for me in Arizona, because I haven't ever seen it here, was Kazim from
Okay.
Last Crusade. So I just got that one. But yeah, very excited to keep finding these figures. Probably at San Diego Comic-Con in a couple weeks, I'll probably see and purchase some more of those. But yeah, agreed that the prices are getting absurd for action
Yes.
figures.
And then I don't open them.
Yeah,
I keep them.
right.
You can't even see them.
Mm,
So as an excuse to open them, I also buy them for my 7-year-old.
yeah,
But buy it, two of them's $50. So
right.
it's getting pretty expensive.
Yeah, I got to interview some representatives from Hasbro at Star Wars Celebration in London a couple months ago. I guess it's 3 months ago now. And I talked with them about this new process of releasing them without the window, so you can't see the
Hmm.
figure anymore. And they said, yeah, they are actually going back to including the window. I don't think it'll happen in time for this Indiana Jones series, but the Star Wars figures, I think, starting maybe at the beginning of next year, will be released with the window again. I think they probably saw a hit in their sales because of that, because there are so many
Yeah.
collectors who buy these and they want to display them with the box, and it just doesn't
Yeah.
work that way.
You want to put it up, I've seen some collectors actually have pigs in their museum or whatever, and they put them up on the pigs.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to do that when you can't see the figures. So they get rolled away like the Ark at the end of
Right.
Raiders and put into a box.
Let's say hi to Charles Johnson from Brooklyn, New York. Hi, Charles. I'm from Long Island, New York, not far from where you are. And then also to Hope Blay Myers. And I like that Hope gives me the pronunciation of her name each time. Thank you for that, Hope. Let's continue with some news items here. Oh, another Indiana Jones piece. I got to go and meet the Indiana Jones character who is roaming Adventureland at Disneyland. That was fun. It's glad to see him back in the park. The performers there are doing a good job. And it was fun to interact with him and get to see him. He's got a little kind of scroll, or he calls it a tapestry that he unrolls. He's like trying to solve a mystery around Adventureland using some of the iconography in that land. Sometimes he goes up on top of the Jungle Cruise Q building and looks down from up there. I don't know. What are your thoughts on having that character back in the park, probably for a limited time while they're promoting this new movie?
I'm supportive of it. I mean,
Yeah.
he should always be in the park. It's
Yeah.
it's a big part. I'm all about sharing Indy with the next generation, because I feel
Yeah.
like my kids know about him, obviously, because I'm such a fan. But a lot of kids, he's going straight over their head, and
Yeah.
I think having Indy in there for the kids to get excited about is good. Although I have beef with a specific aspect of this character.
Okay, I'd love to hear it.
Okay, so I am a nut for collecting, more so than the toys. I collect the indie gear,
Uh-huh.
and my biggest, I would say, part of my fandom is the indie gear. Like you can see, I have Short Round's hat on,
Yeah.
and the character in Disneyland is wearing that Dorfman Pacific hat, which
Fedora.
is all right, right?
Yeah.
But Indy's hat, you really got to nail it, or else he looks like a cowboy.
Right.
And I wish, it's very easy to get screen accurate hats these days, and not for much money. So I wish they would really, fix the hat. Because the profile is everything.
The thing that I noticed about the hat is it has the brim is wrong. It has the rounded, or I don't even know what you would call it, the little
it's like
bulge
stitched
on the end of the brim. Yeah. And Indy's hat in the movies does not have that. It's flat all the way out to the end. So that bothered me a little bit. You think Disney would splurge to get the accurate costume there?
Yeah, because even if you wanted to get a cheap, and I shouldn't say cheap, because the folks at Akubra do a great job at replicating the hat, and in fact, their block, that the thing which the hat is shaped on, is, and I'm probably boring your viewers to death.
No,
but
this is interesting to me.
The thing that the hat is shaped on is very important. The block, the shape of, so like we got Indy's hat here. This iconic shape is very important to collectors and people who cosplay as Indy. And that block was made by Steve Delk, who did the hats for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. He shared that with the folks at Akubra, and I think right now you can get like $160. You can get a pretty screen accurate hat. I have one of them, and they send it to you open crowned, and you can shape it yourself to look like whatever you want. But that is like $160 for Disney parks should be a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
you can get 12 of them.
That's very true. And I kind of wish they would follow through on stuff like that. But the really cool thing about seeing the character in the park is kind of like you were saying earlier, watching him interact with younger fans. I saw a couple kids dressed as Indiana Jones go up and talk with him, and he was really giving them special attention, which is great. And he was handing out the decoder cards, the translator cards for the mariglyphs in the attraction queue and everything. So it's really cool just to see him there. Yeah, there's a little bit left to be desired with the costume for
Right.
sure, but glad to have him back in the park for however long that lasts. I do have a couple items I added here after I sent you the outline, James. I just wanted to mention this morning, Hasbro, the toy company we were talking about earlier, has teased the upcoming new HasLab project. This is their crowdsourced project. They have fans basically pre-order these new very large scale items from the Star Wars universe, so that they know that there's people who want to buy this thing before they make it. They made the big sail barge through that process. They made the Razor Crest from the Mandalorian, and they've got another one of these projects coming out. They just teased this morning with a tweet that had some Arabic text in it. People have pretty much figured out what this is going to be at this point. And I think I can say that the consensus among fans is that they're going to be making the Ghost, the ship from Star Wars Rebels, that will also be featured in Ahsoka, the upcoming live action series. But we'll get yeah. Are you excited for this project?
Yeah. So the last Hasbro, what was it, HasLab thing that I
HasLab.
bought was
Yeah.
the Ghostbusters Spangler Proton Pack.
Okay. Yeah, so you know exactly what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. Yeah. So we'll probably get confirmation of this at San Diego Comic-Con, which is again coming up in just a couple of weeks. So stay tuned for more news about that. And then lastly, going back to Indiana Jones real quick, I played this new board game called Indiana Jones Sands of Adventure from Funko Games, and we played it last weekend. I wrote a review on laughingplace.com, so you can go and find that on the website. Do you know about this game? Have you played this, James?
I own it, but I bought it specifically with the intention of painting the miniatures inside of
Okay.
it.
So you paint the miniatures and then you would display them? Is that the idea?
Well, I'll probably play the board game, but not
Okay.
until I paint the miniatures.
The board game is fun. It's really like rapid fire, fast paced, and my brain does not work that fast. My wife was making fun of it, making fun of me when we were playing it, because I like to, with board games especially, I like to take my time, plan out my next move. Like, okay, give me a few minutes to decide what I'm going to do. And this game really requires you to think very fast. I called it, it's kind of like speed Uno.
Mm,
If you played Uno, like you got to think really, really quickly. So
right.
if you do like that kind of game, I would recommend this. And it obviously is tied to the Indiana Jones franchise. It's mostly, I think, almost entirely themed after Raiders of the Lost Ark
Yes.
exclusively. So that's from Funko Games. It's available now. I want to say it might be a Target exclusive, but check that out. Okay, that's the end of Star Wars headlines for this week, and that's going to bring us into our main topic for this episode, which is the new film Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny from Lucasfilm and Disney. So as we start this conversation here, I want to mention that I appeared on our mutual friend Skywalking Through Neverland's podcast last week, talking all about this movie. We had all attended the premiere. The folks from Skywalking Through Neverland and I had attended the premiere of Dial of Destiny, and we got together after that via Zoom or via StreamYard here to talk all about the film. So you can check me out on their podcast, giving my opinion pretty in depth. We talked for an hour and a half about the film. So go check that out. In this episode, I mostly want to hear what James thought of the film and give a little bit of feedback of whatever we get to talking about here. So, James, I want to start this off by asking you, since you are a really big indie fan going way back, what were your expectations going into this fifth movie?
Well, my expectations were low. I'm going to be honest. This is coming off the heels. I'm also a big DC Comics fan, and this is
Okay.
coming off the heels of the Flash,
Yeah.
which disappointed me a little bit. And it also dealing with time travel. It also dealing with a hero from the '80s that has kind of returned. and is older. And so I was kind of bummed out going into this. And I'm going to be honest, my first viewing of it, I seen it in Dolby. They didn't turn the lights off,
Oh no.
and the sound was not
Ugh.
working to its full. In Dolby, the seats vibrate. And so it wasn't. I didn't really have a good time the first time, and I was kind of disappointed. But I seen it twice. I seen it again,
Okay.
and upon second viewing, I liked it a lot more.
Okay. Were both these in New York City or
Yeah, yeah. So
okay.
both in AMC's on the East Coast, and the Thursday night, I feel like they were not prepared, and
Okay.
then Sunday, it was a lot better experience.
Okay. Yeah, I hate that. I hate when I go to the movie and it's not presented in the way that it was intended
Right.
by the filmmakers. I remember seeing Ryan Johnson's movie Knives Out, and it was presented in the wrong aspect ratio for the entire film. And I just like it's like something's wrong, like the heads are getting cut off or something. I like looked it up afterwards and was like, yeah, this is supposed to be in 185 and they were showing it in 235. It's yeah, it really bugs
Yeah.
me as well. So you said the first time you saw it, you had a poor experience. You didn't care for that experience, but the second time you watched it, you liked it a lot more. So besides the presentation itself, what stuck out to you about that second viewing that kind of helped you change your mind a little bit?
So I don't know if people know this because they probably have only seen it once and moved on. But what I want to point out is that this movie is pretty deep. I've been talking to my friends about it, and when you really go through it beat by beat,
Yeah.
the writing is where this film is strongest. Um, the setups and the payoffs, you notice on the second viewing what Mangold is
Mhm.
doing with the story uh, way more. So I would say if you've only seen it once, I'd say see it again because you know, for instance, there's a great part where Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character Helena does the card trick, and that are we talking about spoilers on this podcast?
Yeah, we should say, the movie's been out for almost a week. Um, Hopefully you've had a chance to see it. But yeah, if you haven't seen it yet and you don't want it spoiled, this might be the point to tune out because we are going to go into
Yeah.
spoilers here. Yeah, go ahead.
So with that in mind, there's that card trick that she does, and she says, it's not a loaded deck. It's just I force it. I
Yeah,
force you to pick the card or whatever. And then at the end, that's exactly what the dial does. No matter she
right.
says, no matter what we do, it comes back to him. So there's a lot of foreshadowing like that through the whole
Yeah,
movie, and that's just smart writing. I
yeah,
love that. And it might not be what you expected from an Indiana Jones film, but
right.
this movie is a good movie in terms of character development and sending this character off with one last emotional journey.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I When I appeared on Skywalking Through Neverland last week, I had only seen the film once. Like you, I went back and saw it a second time this past weekend, and I did appreciate a lot of that foreshadowing. It really only a lot of that stuff will really only stick out to you if you've already seen the movie. So it is designed, I think, for multiple viewings in that way. So great job with setting all that stuff up. So I totally agree about that. I really want to real quickly. I want to address some of the comments that we got here. Tony Betty said a lot of the people said there was a lot to be desired with the actor portraying Indy at the parks based on social media. Yeah, I saw that as well, and I would say the guy that I interacted with on Friday, which was the first day he was there, he had the wrong like head shape. I think he just had a Harrison Ford, I think, has a round face,
Mhm.
and this guy had a longer, taller face. It just wasn't the right profile. I saw pictures of the guy who was playing him over the weekend. It was closer to what I picture when think of. Well, you're not going to be perfect, obviously, in theme park casting, but you kind of want to get somebody who has the same general shape of his face, and I think that second guy did a little bit of a better job. Did you notice that as well?
I will say that Disney World does a good job
Yeah,
at this.
right,
Every actor, maybe because they're stunt guys, but every actor that plays Indy in the Epic Stunt Spectacular in Florida,
right,
he always nails it.
right.
And down to the original guy. Did you see the original actor was there at the
Yes.
premiere? Yeah, and so
So
the
I didn't see
original
him when I was
stunt
there,
double.
but I saw the new. We actually put up a news story about him attending. So it was really cool that he got to attend that after having participated in that stunt show for so long. Yeah,
Yeah, so I think they do a good job at finding the type. But yeah, it is very difficult when you mention finding someone that you do. Again, it don't need to be facial features. It
yeah,
you mentioned your brain went straight to head shape, and that's
yeah.
because the silhouette is what
Okay,
makes this character. Steven
okay,
Spielberg talks about all his
right.
characters having that specific, unique silhouettes.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's most important is getting that silhouette right.
Yeah. Also, Hope told me I need to keep up with the chat more, which is definitely an issue that I have. So I will try that, Hope. And then lastly, I want to say hi to Sonia, Priscilla, Pentoja. Pentoja? Am I saying that right? Good afternoon, Sonia. Okay, let's I want to go through the creative team behind the new film real quickly. This was directed by James Mangold. You know him from Logan, Ford v Ferrari, which was a big critical darling a couple of years ago, and Walk the Line, which was the biography, the biopic of Johnny Cash with Joaquin Phoenix some years ago. So, acclaimed filmmaker. He's made some good stuff. It makes sense for him to come aboard. Now, in your mind, James, why do you think Spielberg didn't direct this one?
I think probably uh, just in terms of what he wanted to do creatively versus what Disney's expectation was with the story. I
Okay.
think it my I want to assume that it's a similar thing as The Force Awakens, where George Lucas had mentioned they wanted to make a retro movie and he wanted to make something new. And I think Spielberg probably would have took it in not a bad direction, just
Yeah.
a more unexpected direction than this. Not that this movie is fan service, but they wanted something specific out of it, and Spielberg's probably thought, well, I'm probably not the guy for that. You probably
Right.
want to have someone younger come in and do something that's more of an homage to the series, where he'd probably be interested in doing something a little bit different. That's just my assumption.
Now, do you think that ended up being the right choice, or do you wish that Spielberg had stuck around?
I think that's the right choice for the last. I'm always going to wish that Spielberg had done the very final one.
Yeah.
I think it was the right choice in terms of looking at this character from 30,000 feet and
Right.
not thinking about it in terms of Spielberg's view on the character is going to be very different, having kind of created the character. Where we wanted to look at it through the lens of someone who was more of a fan, and I think you got more of an emotional journey than you would have probably got with Steven Spielberg,
Right.
where Mangold is more of a character-driven director. Um, I would say, everything happens for a reason, and I would say, this was probably the only way it was happening,
Hmm.
um, truthfully. But there's little differences that you probably, most people wouldn't even notice, but down to the lens choices
Yeah.
versus the two directors. Mangold famously directs with like within the 40 millimeter range, which is a more narrowed view, where Spielberg famously shoots with that 21 millimeter and likes those big wide shots.
Yeah.
So, but I still liked it. I still enjoyed it.
Okay. The writers were Jez and John Henry Butterworth. I think they're brothers, who co-wrote Edge of Tomorrow.
Hmm.
David Kep came back. I think did a rewrite on the script. You know him from Jurassic Park. He also wrote Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and James Mangold also contributed to the script. The producers, of course, were Kathleen Kennedy, Frank Marshall, and Simon Emanuel, who comes from the Batman. He's done a bunch of other stuff as well. The executive producers, by the way, were listed as Spielberg and Lucas, so they were at least there in a consulting sort of way, I believe. And cinematographer was, I don't know how to pronounce this name, I'm going to say it wrong, Phedon, Phedon, Papa Michael. He is most famous for the movie Nebraska with Bruce Dern. Great film, like that a lot.
He's a great director of photography.
Okay, yeah, the movie looks really good. Edited by Michael McCusker from Ford v Ferrari, with Andrew Buckland from The Girl on the Train, and Dirk Westervelt, who cut Logan. The music, of course, is by John Williams, who has composed the score for all 5 Indiana Jones films. Let's ask James, what did you think of the score for this film? I've seen people complaining that Williams was mostly quoting stuff that he had written previously. We didn't get too many interesting new themes. Obviously, Helena Shaw has a new theme, but I don't know. Did you feel that way about the score for this one?
Um, I had that thought that it is kind of a greatest hits of Indiana Jones themes.
Yeah.
But I think the new stuff that he did do will be remembered for quite a long time. I always, everybody loves Ray's theme. Well,
Right.
Helena's theme, I think, is even that much better.
Okay.
And I think that some of the new stuff. I mean, John Williams, he's an older guy now, but you're talking about a legend
Yeah.
that we're lucky to have, and the fact that he's still doing movies amazes me. So I don't think there'll be anyone like him in the future, and there certainly wasn't anybody like him before him. And you're just lucky to have him right now.
Definitely true. A living legend. Always amazing to see him perform live, and great to have him still writing movie scores while we still have him around. So let's go through the characters of this film. Obviously, the title character is Indiana Jones, back for one last adventure, played by Harrison Ford. What did you think of Harrison's performance in this movie?
Harrison knocked it out of the park with this performance.
Yeah.
I think I think the emotions. So the few parts that stuck out to me were, number one, how he again, spoilers for anybody who hasn't
Yes.
seen it, how he addresses Helena on the boat about the time travel, where he would go.
Mm-hmm.
Man, he just delivered. I would go back and stop my son from enlisting.
Right.
That whole monologue is just great. The emotional, like I said, Mangold give us a more character driven emotional story. So when you get to the part about I was talking today with someone about how Helena's laughing that they escaped, which in the old movies Indy probably would have laughed that he escaped too, but he says my friend was just murdered.
Yeah.
And he has that somber tone, and you feel it in your chest when he says that. He's bringing us out of the roguish pulp adventure story and into reality to say, I'm older now, and these things, I maybe never took them seriously before, but I'm taking them seriously now. And then towards the end, when that moment when he wants to stay with Archimedes, and like when he says for who at the end.
Yeah.
Oh, that hits you right in the chest. I think he done a great job.
Agreed. Yeah, totally knocked it out of the park. You can tell when he cares about his performance. You can tell when he's phoning it in, and you can tell when he cares. When Harrison Ford gives a moving performance like this, he definitely cared.
Right.
To give one final grand farewell to Indiana Jones. The second lead of this movie is Helena Shaw, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. We know her from Solo, A Star Wars Story. She was L337, the droid. She's also the creator and star of the Fleabag series, which I have not watched. It's a British sitcom, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But I do plan on checking that out eventually because I enjoy her. What did you think of Helena and Phoebe in this film?
I think she done a good job. I'm not familiar with her acting,
Yeah.
but she was. I wish they would have given her a little bit more. I think she was a little bit of an indie light in
Right.
uh, this movie. But as far as contrasted with Marion, with Elsa Schneider, um, with Kate Capshaw's character Willie Scott, she just fits right in with that list of indie girls, I guess we could call them. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. To me, what they were doing with, you said indie light. To me, they were almost making her into a Belloc, if that makes
Mm,
sense. Like Indy
mhm.
saw her as sort of a protege, but when he saw what she was all about, she's just taking these artifacts and selling them on the black market, basically. I think
Right.
he's seeing that she's turning into more of a Belloc than an Indiana Jones. So
Right.
he's going to try and steer her in the other direction. I like that dynamic between them. But yeah, I enjoyed her as well. Now, I mentioned earlier that this character Ronaldo is getting an action figure, which I wonder now that the Hasbro folks have seen the movie if they regret that choice, because Ronaldo is not in
Mm.
the movie a whole bunch. Uh,
Yeah.
though Antonio Banderas is the third credited actor in the credits. So big name star, very small part. What did you think of that role?
I'd do a whole spin-off on that boat.
Yeah,
Antonio Banderas, that whole little crew, the guy with the
yeah,
cigar. I love, pirates and like pulp adventure that has to do specifically with the sea, if that makes sense.
yeah,
And
sure.
so seeing that whole little I love their whole little vibe on their boat.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I mean, I don't know if you could have done more with him. I guess he kind of served his role, and unfortunately, he met an untimely end at the hands of those Nazi characters. But yeah, it's great to see Antonio as part of the indie franchise. We got a couple returning faces from previous films: Marion Ravenwood, played by Karen Allen, and Sala, played by John Rice Davies. Good to see them again. Were you happy with the amount of screen time that they got, or was there anybody else that you had hoped would show up in this film?
I wish Sala would have went with them.
Yeah, and he
I
says he got his passport, he was ready to go,
Yeah.
and he
I
kind of
wish
turns
he
him
would
down.
have, or maybe showed up later. But I think he could have been a nice contrast to Phoebe Waller-Bridge
Yeah,
and the young guy that's with her. You had the two older guys, but maybe that's not the vibe they were going for. But I love that line he gives. I miss. They put it in the trailer.
yeah,
I miss the desert. I miss the sea. That I think John Rice Davies knocked it out of the park too, and so did Karen Allen.
yeah.
She plays. It almost seems like a different character in this film than she played in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, doesn't it?
Definitely more subtle and
Yeah,
Marion, yeah, I would say. Yeah, I would agree with that. Certainly, she allowed herself to look older. Like, you
yeah,
notice her hair wasn't dyed brown this time or
right.
anything. Yeah,
And that kind of shocked me that she looked like Marion from Raiders, but just much older. Where in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, she had kind of a different vibe going. I think she knocked it out of the park though, and the callback to the elbow and the whole thing, that was great too.
yeah, a good way to end it,
Mhm.
echoing that scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark. We got some Nazi characters, some neo-Nazis mixed with some former Nazis. Uh, what did you think of the villains in this movie, and specifically Dr. Voller, Jurgen Voller, played by Mads Mikkelsen, who's an ex-Nazi who's come to work for NASA, helping the United States win the moon race in the 60s.
Well, you have, I mean, he's such a good actor,
Yeah,
and everything he plays really sells it. From Rogue One to this, he's always good. But this character, man, it's like they took him from the pages of like a pulp adventure magazine from the 50s.
right.
He shined in that, and at the end when he puts that Nazi suit on, I was like, wow, this looks like something a comic you would have seen back in the day or something. But Yeah, he was probably one of, if not my favorite parts of the movie was his character. You know, he wasn't this tough guy. He was the brains, and um, but he was menacing in a completely different way.
Yeah, definitely always enjoy watching. I do feel like Mads kind of gets typecast a little bit
He
as a
does.
villain.
He does.
You know, I think we first, or I first noticed him in Casino Royale, the James Bond movie, but he also played like Hannibal Lecter on the TV show Hannibal. At least in Rogue One, he wasn't really a villain. He was working for the Empire, but hesitantly. So he
Yes.
got to have a different spin on that character. Did you want to say something,
I was
James?
just gonna say, like
Yeah,
the idea, and Indy comments on this at the end. He says, you know, what kind of Nazi wants to go back and kill the Fuhrer?
yeah, yeah,
The idea that he, and again, this was so smart. He was
yeah,
obsessed with going back and correcting Hitler's mistakes.
yeah,
Indy was obsessed with the past.
yeah,
Baz, I think I'm saying his Toby Jones's character
yeah,
was obsessed with this dial and the past. And you know, I seen someone on Twitter, they had said something like, you know, you got to live in the present. You can't live in the past.
right,
And that was kind of the theme of this movie. And each character and each actor really brings that to the surface when you
right.
watch this movie. You can't live in the past. You have to move on with your life. And I don't know, was that a comment on, you know, nostalgia culture that we're in
Maybe.
right now? I don't know, but it was really well written, very well written.
It's funny, I hadn't heard it expressed that way, and when you said it just now, it kinda started to chill down my spine because I do think thematically, when people revisit this movie, they will find a lot to value there, but also it kind of echoes in a small way, echoes what we heard Kylo Ren say in The Last
Yes,
Jedi.
yes, yes.
Forget the past, you know,
Let it die. Yeah,
he's the villain of those movies, so you don't know if that's advice you should take, or
yeah,
if that's what the filmmakers actually believe. But it is a similar sentiment, and it does come in another franchise that has been revived over and over again. So
right.
you have to wonder if this is the intent of the filmmakers saying, like, we I'm happy to make this movie, but maybe we should be moving on to new ideas.
Yeah, I wonder if that is kind of the common sentiment among these young
Yeah,
filmmakers that are doing pretty much all the blockbusters they have to do
right.
is sequels and reboots.
Yeah,
So I'm wondering if that's the thing. But like, you can go through, and not to sidetrack our conversation, but you can go through this film and like the idea that Indy grabs the horse
yeah.
versus the other guy grabs the motorcycle,
Hmm.
and then he jumps off the horse and goes onto the train, and he says the train's faster. Well, what a horse, a train is a an iron horse. That's
Modern
what, right.
conveyance, yeah.
So, you know, and then like the whole space race thing. Like, there's so many layers to this movie that it requires multiple viewings to
Yeah.
really appreciate.
Okay, well, let's get into the weeds a little bit with this movie. Any other favorite moments or maybe least favorite moments that stuck out to you, James?
Um, boy, feel like at 100 miles an hour, I've hit every kind of thing that stuck out to me. But I think for me, the like I said, the um, Indy talking about his son and what he
Yeah.
would change, and seeing my favorite character kind of regret decisions that he had made in the past
Mm,
and feel like he wants to change, go back and change things, and have to move past his grief. Something that, you know, that moment, and then couple that with the ending where Marion says, "Are you back?" Well, when I first seen that, I was like, "That's such an odd thing to ask." She left him, according to his story. But then my wife said something. She said, "Maybe, maybe you know that was a lie. Maybe he left her. Maybe it was him running from the grief, and that's why she asks, 'Are you back?'"
hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
so.
My interpretation of that line was that Indy had been absent, not physically absent, maybe, but mentally and sociably absent, distant in a way since his son died. And this is Marion asking him, "Are you going to be present if we if we are back together? Are you going to be present in the relationship
Right.
again?"
No, that's probably true too, and
Yeah,
it's the thought of it goes back to the whole thing that his brain was probably in the past,
yeah,
reliving what he done wrong
right,
because he wasn't there for the boy. If we go by canon,
yeah,
he met him older and then lost him pretty quickly,
yeah.
and so
Well,
um,
let's talk about that then. Since you bring it up, I want to ask you about the way they handled Shia LaBeouf's exit from this franchise because they kind of set him up at the end of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull to be an heir to the Indiana Jones legacy. There's that moment where he puts on the fedora. Of course, Indy grabs it away from him as though to say, "Not quite yet." But the implication is there that, should this continue, maybe Shia's character Mutt will don the hat and go on adventures of his own. And then we get to the fifth film. Shia LaBeouf has had some issues, both personally and professionally. I think he has said some things about Indiana Jones 4 that maybe didn't reflect that well on him, didn't get invited back to this last movie. What do you think of the way now? I said I want to issue a correction here because I said on the Skywalking podcast that he likely went off and fought in the Korean War, but then I looked it up and the events of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull take place after the Korean War had ended. So it would have been Vietnam,
Vietnam,
the
yeah.
Vietnam War that he went off and fought and died in. But what do you think about that decision to kind of kill him off between movies?
Um, I feel it was kind of the only way you could do this, right? I mean, if
Yeah,
he's not going to come back, how do you explain that Indy's child wouldn't be, present there without doing some kind of, cheesy, oh, he's off on his own adventure kind of a thing?
yeah,
It added weight to Indy's regret of not, being there for this kid and not, you know, kind of having a better relationship with him and how he kind of felt responsible for the boy's ultimate demise. And it, I think they handled it great
yeah,
because I felt that you think about Shia LaBeouf when he says those lines, you think about Mutt, and I got sad. So
right.
I mean, it worked for me at least.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it worked as well. I think they handled it about as well as it could have been handled, considering the circumstances. Um, I do want to ask you about well. First of all, I want to say, my favorite moments from the film were the climactic battle sequence. For me, I absolutely love this idea of Nazis traveling back in time and fighting Romans. Like, it was something I hadn't seen before in a movie. I thought it was really well executed, really fun, and a lot of really fun beats and inventive fight, battle choreography there. So that, to me, any nitpicks I may have about the film are redeemed by that climactic battle sequence. I just think everything builds up to then, and it's followed through on so perfectly. Everything in that climax really works well for me. But then I also enjoyed the opening sequence, which is a flashback to the end of World War II. And we never really got to see Indy during World War II proper after the U.S. had entered the war and everything. So this kind of gives us that opportunity, but it does open up the conversation about this whole de-aging process that they've used it in some Star Wars projects, and the reaction to that has been mixed. Here, again, on the Skywalking podcast, I said it worked for me about 90% of the time. After the second time I saw it, I think I would downgrade that to maybe 75%. I could see, again, my brain is looking for it all the time when I'm watching those scenes. I'm looking for the seams of, like, can I tell when it's Uncanny Valley, Indiana Jones, and when it looks realistic? So three-quarters of the time it worked for me. How did you feel about what they did with the de-aging and putting together that whole adventure of Indiana Jones kind of in his prime to open up this movie?
Well, without pulling my soapbox out,
Okay.
uh, I don't think they give the effects artists enough time to work
Hmm.
on these effects. Um, I don't think the final work reflects what these effects artists are capable to do. Um, they're famously underpaid, and they are famously rushed. And with that being said, what they pulled off um, was amazing.
Yeah.
That using artificial intelligence and that to kind of go through that algorithm to create those, however they do that with the deep fake technology.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys are doing. It's easy just to say, well, man, when he turned his head like that, I could tell it was a
Yeah.
mask. You know what I mean? But um, you have to really step back and think what these guys are doing is unheard of and very experimental technology, like cutting edge stuff. So I feel like what they movies are a time machine. Uh, very much like this film touches on time machines. Movies to me always are kind of a portal to take us back, and now they're able to take us back and make our favorite actors younger. And so we got to see what Indiana Jones was like in World War II,
Yeah.
which was, for all its faults, what few they were, it was a fantastic. You bottle that energy from that first 20 minutes of that movie,
Yeah.
and that's what I'm all about.
I agree. I think it was the right choice to follow through and do that scene. Again, it was something we hadn't seen before. Indy at the tail end of World War II. There, um, I do think, yeah, the credit has to be paid to the people working behind the scenes, who the wizards who are bringing this stuff to life. There were moments where it didn't work for me. I think another aspect that just didn't click for me was the voice. I think you can hear old Harrison Ford talking through young Indiana Jones' face. I kind of wish they had de-aged the voice a little bit more.
Yeah, and it goes in and out because there's
Yeah,
parts I'm like, ooh, that's the voice is spot on, and then it's like the gruffness comes back, and I'm like, well,
right,
I can tell that's an 80-year-old Indiana Jones there.
right. But by and large, I'm glad that they did it. I think we are going to get closer and closer to the point where this technology is, 100% there, and you can accomplish something like this without me having to study every, I'm watching
Yeah,
every frame of every shot. It's just the way my brain works. I'm just like studying every shot. Like, does it look right to me? And most of the time, it did look right to me in this case. So I don't have a problem with it in concept. I think in execution, it's getting there. It's almost there. So hopefully that will continue to improve. And again, I don't regret them having gone through with it, because I do think it mostly works for me. Is there anything else that you want to talk about? Anything else specific from the film that you want to cover before we start wrapping up this conversation, James?
you know, I would just say that for me, and I'll put this question in your lap. This very well might be the last time we see Indiana Jones on the
Yeah.
big screen,
Yep.
and I'll kind of ask you: do you think that a kind of Bond-ish recast with a young Indy set during these World War II times or whatever would work?
I think anything can work if it's done right and well, but I don't necessarily know if I want that to happen. I think, we have seen other actors play Indiana Jones, even going back to the early '90s. We had Sean Patrick Flannery, and I'm blanking on the kid's name, the younger version, but
Mhm.
um, and River Phoenix, of course, and whoever else has played him in voice
George
acting,
Hall.
whatever. Yeah, exactly. Old Indiana Jones. So it's not like it hasn't been done before, but Yes, I think Kathleen Kennedy is right also when she says when we hear the name Indiana Jones, we see Harrison Ford. So I think it would be very difficult to recapture that magic of Indy in his prime without having Harrison Ford. That said, I think I'm still in favor, and in fact, I would be very enthusiastic about them doing like a Batman the animated series with Indy. And many people have brought this up and talked about this. And there's that famous YouTube video somebody made the opening title sequence. But
And
yeah,
there's a new thing coming out,
yeah,
and I wanna shamelessly. I have nothing to do with this, but
sure,
I do want to plug this thing, and let me just pull it up on Twitter. I want to make sure I get this guy's name correct. If I can't find it, oh well.
okay,
But I think his name is yeah, here it is. Here it is. Rob Pratt. And Rob Pratt's an animator, professional animator, and
okay,
he is working one of his many fan films. He's famous for a Superman short that he had did that was a fan film kind of thing, very short, but he did it with this old 1930s flair. And he released recently on his Twitter, it's called Indiana Jones and the Curse of the Sunken City.
hmm,
And he released a little pencil test animation that, in the spirit of Indy coming out this weekend or this past weekend, he
yeah,
released this pencil test animation, and it looks fantastic. It's got
oh.
that Disney and classic animated vibe, and what little he showed of it, I'm super pumped for that. And I don't know why Disney doesn't capitalize on the animated Indy.
Yeah, that would be an amazing project if you had the right talent behind it. I would be all for filling in the gaps of Indy's adventures that
Yes.
we haven't seen yet with the animated
Clone
adventures.
Wars. Clone Wars did a good job
Yeah,
at filling in those gaps of the Clone Wars. So
right. I really hope that I hope the franchise is not dead. Obviously, we still have this video game that has been announced coming out within the next year or so, from Bethesda, I believe. Was that the developer?
yeah,
Uh,
Bethesda, but it's
yeah,
Machine Gun Games, I
yeah.
think, is which is kind of underneath. But it's the same guys
Okay.
that did Wolfenstein.
Great. Okay. So yeah, we'll look forward to that. And yeah, I just don't want the franchise to just fall by the wayside completely. So I'd love to see it continue through the
Comics,
ancillary
yeah,
materials. Yeah, publishing,
publishing.
animation, games. I think there's a lot of untapped potential there in Indiana Jones. And as far as Dial of Destiny goes, where I fall, where I have landed on this movie is that I just think it needs to be trimmed. I just think it's 2 hours and 35 minutes. I'd say bring it down to like 2 hours and 10 minutes. Most of that could come out of like the middle to me.
Yeah,
I don't know. Do you agree with that?
I think the beginning is kind of long for me.
Okay.
As much as I loved that part of it, it's like its whole own movie. I
Right.
mean, it's got multiple locations, and
That's true.
they go from the train, the castle, the train, the whole thing. There's a lot that probably could be trimmed there and not affect the story. But I
I
understand
guess
that they wanted to,
right.
they want that adventure there at the beginning
I
as
guess
much as possible.
traditionally, if you go back and time the openings of each indie movie, they're probably closer to 10 or 15 minutes, right?
Yeah,
And this one it's like 20 or 25 minutes. So yeah, maybe that's where some fat can be trimmed from that. Uh Honestly, I didn't talk about this on the other podcast, so I want to bring it up. My least favorite scene in this movie, not to close out on a negative point, but I do not like the scene, and it's very easily trimmable because it doesn't affect anything before or after. I don't enjoy the scene where they're walking through the caves. It's Indy and Helena, and they get covered in the bugs, and they both freak out, and they wipe all the bugs off of them, and they run away. To
yeah,
me, that it didn't ring true to me to the character, either character really. But we know Indy's not afraid of bugs. This
yeah.
has been
We know this from
established.
Temple of Doom, right?
Yeah,
And that stood out to me too. Was he trying to say that Indy's kind of a different guy now, but he freaks out
he's
over bugs?
aged into being afraid of bugs. But yeah, even
Yeah,
in the
maybe.
first scene we meet him when Sabito or Satipo or
Yeah,
whatever is covered in the
he,
tarantulas, and he just wipes them off with his
yeah.
whip. But yeah, just that scene bugs me. I kind of wish that was if I could trim any small part of the movie, that would be my first.
Pun intended. It bugs you. Pun intended.
It bugs me. It bugs me. That's very true. Some my friend said, "Oh, the big like millipedes or centipedes or whatever reminded him of snakes, and that's why he was afraid of them." I was
Yeah,
like, "Oh, that's a stretch." I
that's a
guess
stretch.
the eels were kind of like snakes too, I guess. So,
Some people have
uh,
complained about the film being anticlimactic. Where do you sit on
oh,
that?
I disagree with that entirely. I love the climax of this movie. Definitely my favorite part. I don't know what's anticlimactic about it.
Well,
Uh,
I guess maybe how abruptly Voller, meets his
oh,
demise
yeah.
and stuff. But I don't see it as anticlimactic. I see it as the right climax for the character.
Yeah.
But he's older, so it's obviously going to be more intellectual and not him, punching the guy out.
Well,
But
if you think about the way that Belloc dies and the way that Donovan dies, this is pretty much the same thing. They're killed by their own um, unwillingness to admit that they're wrong,
yeah,
basically, you know.
yeah,
Uh, so yeah, their own hubris in messing with these powers that they don't understand.
right,
So I think it fits right in line with that. I had no problem with that.
yeah,
Um, and similarly to what you were saying with the setup and payoff, I love him finding the watch in the tomb of Archimedes and the phoenixes with the propellers. That played really well for me on the second viewing, knowing what
mm,
was to come later. But yeah, that final half hour to me is pretty perfect.
yeah,
I have no complaints about that. Okay, last topic that I want to kind of broach with you here is this movie. You know, it's doing okay at the box office, but I think we can say it's underperforming, especially when you look at the numbers from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Now that was 15 years ago. Maybe people have aged out of the franchise and the younger viewers are not as interested, but what do you think went wrong? I mean, this is also true of other movies. It's not just Indiana Jones and it's not just Disney either because you talked about The Flash. That movie did not do well at all. What's going on with movies, especially big blockbuster movies these days? Is this are we seeing a trend where this might the filmmaking industry as we know it might be kind of unsustainable? What are your thoughts on this, James?
in a day and age where you can view a film on a huge TV in your
Yeah,
house with Dolby Atmos surround sound, right?
right.
In the day and age where people can watch things on their phone and it doesn't bother them, you can't justify a 300 million plus dollar production.
Yeah,
And if you do make a 300 plus million dollar production, it better show on that screen. It better be Ben Hur. And here's my thoughts on it. Raiders of the Lost Ark was made famously for like $20 million. With inflation, you come to that'll be like around 60 million. Not my math. I've seen that on Twitter. But it begs the question, if Raiders was made for $60 million, if it's not my type of film, but Joker made for famously like 75 million
yeah,
dollars. Both of these films made tons of money in the box office
yeah,
and satisfied the blockbuster big tentpole franchise needs of the audience. Why are you making a film that costs $300 million? I think that the limitations of budget that was on Spielberg, that was on Lucas, that was on anyone else that has made something great out of very little, it causes creativity
yeah,
that 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 pressure cooker situation of I only have this limitation, to work with, causes immense creativity versus, oh, we'll do that with CGI, we'll do that with CGI, we'll do that, fill that in later. It's not a sustainable business model for films. Films have to, if they did it back in the day, they should be doing it now. You have to make these uh, you know remakes, sequels, whatever, within a reasonable budget, because the sad part is people are ready to watch it on Disney Plus later.
yeah,
And so if you want the cinemas to survive, which, that's a whole other topic. I believe you have to have cinema. One can't go without the other. And experiencing a movie in a theater is different than experiencing a movie at home. But if you want cinema to survive, you have to start thinking of a better business model, sustainable business model for the price of these movies. 60, 75, $100 million should be it, especially when we have the LED volume. Like The Mandalorian does it so well. They had the limitation of making this Star Wars level TV show. You need Star Wars level effects on a TV show budget. And what happened? They redid the Dystraflex camera. They got those miniatures. It looked amazing. The volume, most people wouldn't even have been able to tell that they weren't on location.
Yeah.
It just breeds creativity that you don't get otherwise.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about the budgets being just blown way out of proportion for the return on investment these days.
Right.
And the volume, I think, especially the way they used it on The Mandalorian, if you have the right filmmakers involved who know what they're doing and know how to make the best use of it, I think they've proven that they can bring the budget way down
Yeah.
through that process. So I do think that's the future of this type of filmmaking, but also kind of like what you were saying with the reduced budget breeding creativity. Maybe the era of like spectacle needs to come to an end and we can focus on story and character. I do think there's a lot to be said for that as well. At the same time, I also think it's just too expensive to go and watch a movie too. And I was wondering, like, why can't all the theater owners, the NATO or whatever, come together and say, okay, let's all agree to bring the prices down to maybe even $10. I mean, that seemed like a lot 20 years ago, whatever, but we could get everything down to $10. I feel like families would be more willing to go and spend $50 to go to a movie instead of 100, which is what they're spending now, you know? Um,
Yeah, I think we're in the age of the subscription.
yeah,
I pay 10
right.
bucks a month to get all the movies. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Why would I've had family members say, why would I ever go and I can just sit on my couch and eventually it'll come to that TV right there
yeah,
and I pay 10 bucks a month for that. So you gotta compete with that. Sadly, that's the state things are in. So making the tickets a little bit cheaper, making the productions a little bit not cheaper, but just less budget because
yeah,
less budget doesn't always mean cheap.
right.
We got Raiders out of that small budget,
Yeah.
so it's doable, especially when you see Mando. I I had sent you the link of I did a test with my own LED TV and my son on the with the LED TV behind him, some
Okay.
plants from Hobby Lobby in the foreground, and I just lit it to match the TV in the background. And if you go to
Uh-huh.
my YouTube channel, you can see this test that I did. And most people didn't even know that I wasn't on location
Yeah.
somewhere. A lot of people was like, "Wow, that's your TV." It's easily done,
Yeah.
and if I can do it, I know these big studios can do
Yeah.
it. So they need to stop paying $300 million
Yeah.
for these productions. They really do.
I think it'll happen. I think that will catch on because I don't see any other way out of it, especially when this keeps happening. There's this big expectation on a movie like Dial of Destiny to make a ton of money. And then when it doesn't, you're going to have the heads of studios start questioning, do we stop making movies altogether? Or is there a way to make this profitable again? And I think that sounds like a reasonable answer to me.
And I would add that what gets what franchises can get butts in seats.
Yeah.
Indiana Jones is going to get me in the seat no matter what.
Right.
But what keeps me coming back is writing, is story.
Right.
Story is what's most important with movies on every level,
Yeah.
from, intellectually, subconsciously. Stories are what get people in the theaters. So if you're not paying your writers,
Yeah.
you're just going through every, having, just do me this treatment and just and you're not putting emphasis on story, you're
Yeah.
going to lose. That's going to be diminishing returns every time. Pay your writers, pay your effects people, cheapen your productions, and be innovative. Let's get back to the magic of filmmaking a little bit instead of just, the factory of this sequel and this reboot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I
I
could
do,
preach on this for days.
no, I think you're absolutely right because I think there's a lot to be said about word of mouth. Like this is something that has kind of fallen by the wayside, but I remember a time. I'm starting to sound like an old man, but I do remember a time where the opening weekend wasn't everything, you know? It's like right now, if the opening weekend is not what they wanted, the movie is considered a failure. But there was a period where you could release a movie and it was called a sleeper hit, you know? It was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it built word of mouth.
Right.
Titanic did that. Like Titanic
Exactly.
opened
Yeah.
and wasn't a smash hit right away, but everybody saw it and they were like, "Oh, this movie's amazing. You got to go see it." And it slowly built an audience, became the highest grossing movie ever released by being a sleeper hit over a period of time, not just, oh, has to be a huge success immediately. And that system only works. Having a sleeper hit only works if the movie is good.
Right.
You're not relying on the marketing. You're not relying on the name. You're relying on people seeing it and liking it and recommending it to other people. And it's an old fashioned idea, I guess. I don't know if it can still work under that model, but I would love to see a return to that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would too. You go to a theater, you sit in the theater, you're with a bunch of people you don't know,
Yeah,
and the lights go down and you have an experience.
right.
Now, if the movie's preaching down your throat and saying something that, is nonsense and not well written, and they're just showing you spectacle, 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 and they're not speaking to your heart, well, you're not going to have that experience.
Yeah,
You're gonna walk out of that theater disappointed, and then that's going to, not everybody are cinephiles, and that they'll just return. Some people are like, the last time I went to the theater, I really didn't like the movie I seen, so I'll just watch that
right.
on Voodoo or whatever. So you gotta hook them and keep them and let them have an experience with those people around them laughing and
Yeah.
gasping and having an emotional experience. If not, yeah, movies are gonna die. Movies are gonna go
Yeah.
by the wayside. So
And I don't think either of us wants that to happen. Although, I've said in recent years, since the invention of the iPhone, basically, I am not a fan of going to the movies as often as I used to be because I see so many people around me. It's so distracting. Everybody's just on their phones. I will say I do have a good experience every once in a while. Like Monday evening, we went back and saw Dial of Destiny for the second time. It was a full house, the Grove here in LA. Everybody was paying attention. Everybody laughed at the right moments. You felt like it was a communal experience where everyone was into the movie and not just there as a way to kill 2.5 hours or whatever.
right.
So it does happen still. I do think there's still magic left in the communal theatrical movie going experience. I just think they got to figure out a way to keep it sustainable and keep everyone happy, both on the studio side and the audience side and the creative side. So I guess it's a big question mark about what the future will hold, but we'll find out as time goes on. And I think that's a good place to end our discussion of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Let's move on to our final segment here on Who's the Boss. It's called First Steps into a Larger World. This is where we talk about the media that we've been consuming and or enjoying outside of Star Wars or Lucasfilm. My example this week is a movie that I saw in the theater and had a great experience. Again, it was called Asteroid City. It's the new Wes Anderson film. I've been a fan of his since Rushmore came out in 1998. Always enjoy his movies. Very quirky sense of humor, very interesting, unique style, great cast, of course. And as always, I recommend checking that out. Asteroid City by Wes Anderson. How about you, James? What have you seen, read, or played, or anything like that lately?
Well, I haven't seen Asteroid City.
Yeah.
I'm not that I'm not a fan. I'm just,
Yeah.
not privy to Wes Anderson as much.
Okay.
I do like the vibe, that retro futuristic vibe
Yeah.
that he has in that movie looks cool. And with
Yeah.
that said, my thing that I would say to check out is something that was grossly under marketed, and that is a television show on Apple TV Plus called Hello Tomorrow. And
Okay.
here I did this whole spiel about cinema, and I'm recommended a TV show. But it just is a shame that it wasn't, you know, marketed as much as because it was a fantastic TV show with a retro futuristic vibe about
Mm.
these con men who go out and are kind of selling tickets to the moon. And so it's a really fun. If you like Fallout or Bioshock, those video games, you'll like this show. And I recommend checking it out.
Okay, yeah. Oh, I gotta check that out. We do have, I think we have access to Apple TV Plus because we watched Ted Lasso recently. So definitely. What was the title again? Hello Tomorrow.
Hello Tomorrow.
Okay.
And so it's a very good show, very well written. It's funny, interesting, and I love just that aesthetic, that retro
Okay.
futuristic aesthetic, like the Twilight Zone kind of vibe.
Nice. I will
Very,
add it
very cool.
to my list. That sounds right up my alley. So I'm definitely going to check that out. That's going to bring us to the end of this week's episode of Who's the Bossk. Big thank you to my guest this week, James W. Burns. James, you
Thank you.
mentioned your YouTube where you've got that test you did. You want to send people there?
Yeah, so it's just indie filmmaker on YouTube,
Okay.
or you can do my name is James Burns or James W Burns,
Okay.
or if you go to my Twitter, it's linked on there. Indie underscore filmmaker.
And Indy is spelled like Indiana Jones,
Yeah,
INDY.
INDY. It's kind of a play on words. And I post all my stuff there. That's where I'm most active is on Twitter.
Okay, indie filmmaker on Twitter and YouTube. Check that out. Next week on Who's the Bossk, I think we're going to be talking about this video game that I am very close to finishing, Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I think I've got one more boss to beat in that, and then we can finally do an episode about that. I've been waiting since that came out to chat about that game. So look forward to that. As always, please visit laughingplace.com for all your Disney news and opinions. And I'm on Twitter, but I'm only posting about like official podcast business there. I've mostly been on Instagram lately, and both of those handles are Who's the Bossk Pod, Twitter and Instagram. My name is Mike Celestino. Thank you so much out there for watching or listening. Real quick, another comment we got from Tony to validate what James is saying. At least that show is already on Apple TV Plus and isn't available in theaters with the option to see it that way. So yeah, you won't be taking away
No.
money from the theatrical run if you go and watch Hello Tomorrow
Right.
on Apple TV. But thank you so much again out there for listening. See you real soon. Bye.